It happened a few years ago, back when 5 of us decided to disappear into the woods for a while. Not literally, but far enough that the city noise, the deadlines, and the constant buzz of phones couldn't reach us anymore. We'd been talking about this camping trip for almost a year, counting down the days, convincing ourselves we needed it. We wanted trees instead of traffic silence, instead of sirens. There were 5 of us in total. Me, Rachel, who was 23 at the time, then Rob, Jenna, Jay, and Dave. None of us were survival experts, but we weren't clueless either. We'd camped plenty before the Catskills, the Adirondacks, familiar places with marked trails and nearby towns. This time, though, we wanted something different, something deeper, somewhere that felt untouched. We chose a remote stretch of the big Indian wilderness in upstate New York, a place where the cell service dies 10 miles before you even hit the trailhead. The drive up was filled with the usual excitement. We were blasting music, stopping at greasy diners, and joking about how Dave was definitely going to be the first one eaten by a bear. We hit the trail around 2:00 p.m. The plan was to hike about 6 miles in, find a specific clearing Jenna had scouted on satellite imagery, and set up base camp. The first few miles were breathtaking. The air was thick with the scent of damp pine and crushed ferns. But as the sun began to dip behind the high ridges, the atmosphere shifted. The woods grew dense, the kind of dense where the light doesn't quite hit the ground, leaving everything in a perpetual murky twilight. Around 5:30 p.m., we stumbled upon something that wasn't on the map. We were pushing through a thicket of hemlocks when we broke into a small, unnatural-looking clearing. It wasn't the one Jenna had picked. In the center of this clearing stood a tripod made of 3 charred cedar branches, lashed together with what looked like dirty medical gauze. Hanging from the center of the tripod was a single mud-stained sneaker. A kid's sneaker. Okay, that's officially creepy, Rob said, his voice jumping an octave. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting around the tree line. Who leaves a kid's shoe hanging in the middle of nowhere? Rachel rolled her eyes, though I noticed her grip tightening on her trekking poles. It's probably just trail magic, Rob, or some edgy hikers trying to freak people out. People do weird stuff for the gram these days. Jenna walked up to it, squinting. The gauze is fresh, she whispered. It hasn't rained in 2 days, and this cloth is still white. If it had been here long, the dew and dirt would have turned it gray. We stood there for a moment in silence. The woods, which had been buzzing with cicadas and birds minutes ago, were suddenly unnervingly quiet. It was that heavy silence, the kind that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck, the distinct sensation of eyes boring into me from the shadows of the hemlocks. Let's just keep moving, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. We've still got 2 miles to the clearing. We pushed on, but the mood had soured. Every snapping twig sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of leaves felt like something moving parallel to us in the brush. About 20 minutes later, Dave, who was bringing up the rear, let out a sharp, muffled cry. Guys, stop. Look at this. We doubled back. Dave was pointing at the trunk of a massive ancient oak tree. Tacked to the bark with a rusted finishing nail was a Polaroid picture. I felt the blood drain from my face as I looked at it. The photo was slightly blurry, taken from a distance and through a screen of leaves. It showed 5 people hiking on a trail. 5 people with backpacks. It was us. But it wasn't a photo of us from 10 minutes ago. Based on the lighting and the specific bend in the trail visible in the background, this photo had been taken at the trailhead nearly 4 hours ago. How is this possible? Rob whispered, his voice shaking. Someone took this at the parking lot, ran ahead of us, through the dense bush, and nailed it here. They would have had to sprint, Jenna said, her analytical mind clearly struggling to find a logical path. And they would have had to stay off the trail to avoid us seeing them. That's nearly impossible terrain to sprint through. Rachel didn't have a skeptical comeback this time. She was staring at the photo, specifically at the edge of the frame. In the corner of the Polaroid, partially obscured by a tree branch, was a figure. It was just a silhouette, tall, spindly, and draped in what looked like a dark, heavy poncho. It was standing just a few feet behind Dave in the parking lot, but none of us had seen it. We need to turn back, Dave said, his voice bordering on a panic attack. Right now, we go back to the car. It's getting dark, Jenna countered, though she looked just as rattled. If we turn back now, we're hiking through those narrow switchbacks in the pitch black with headlamps. If someone is out here, they know the terrain better than we do. We're safer finding a spot we can defend, or at least somewhere with high visibility. As we argued, I looked past the tree, deeper into the woods. The sun was almost gone now, leaving the forest in a deep, bruised purple. And there, about 50 yards away, tucked behind a stand of white birch, I saw a flash of white. It was the medical gauze. Another tripod. And this time there was something else hanging from it. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The light landed on the second tripod. Hanging from the center wasn't a shoe this time. It was a small battery-operated digital clock. The red numbers were glowing in the dark. It was counting down. 001422, 001421. Whatever it was counting down to, we had 14 minutes to find out. The red numbers on that digital clock felt like a death sentence. 14 minutes. It doesn't sound like much time, but when you're standing in the middle of a darkening forest miles from help, 14 minutes feels like an eternity and a heartbeat all at once. We have to go. Now Dave's voice was high-pitched, almost a squeal. He started backing away from the tripod, his eyes wide and reflecting the red glow of the timer. Go where Dave. Rachel snapped, though her hands were shaking so hard she had to shove them into her pockets. Back to the trail, where we saw the Polaroid, or forward toward, whatever this is, Jenna, usually the voice of reason, was staring at the clock. It's a psychological tactic, she whispered more to herself than us. They want us to panic. They want us to run blindly into the brush. That's how people get lost, how they get hurt. Who is they? I asked. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it was actually painful. The person who took the photo, the person who set this up, I don't care who they are, Rob yelled, his calm demeanor finally shattering. I'm not staying here to find out what happens when that hits zero. He turned and started jogging back the way we came. We didn't have much of a choice. We couldn't let him go alone, and none of us wanted to stay in that clearing. We took off after him, our heavy boots thumping against the forest floor, our headlamps dancing wildly across the trunks of the trees. In the chaos of the run, the woods seemed to transform. Every shadows looked like a person. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like a pursuit. We ran for what felt like miles, but in the dark and in a state of pure adrenaline-fueled panic, our sense of direction was gone. Wait, Jenna gasped, stopping and doubling over to catch her breath. Wait. Look. We stopped. We were in a clearing. But as I looked around, my blood turned to ice. In the center of the clearing stood a tripod. A single mud-stained kid's sneaker hung from the center. No, Rachel whispered. No, we ran in a straight line. We didn't turn around. We must have looped, Rob said, his voice trembling. The terrain. It tricks you. I looked at the tripod, then past it. My light hit a tree. The ancient oak tree. I walked over to it, my legs feeling like lead. The Polaroid was still there, nailed to the bark. But it wasn't the same photo. I pulled it off the nail. This photo was taken from a high angle, maybe from a branch above us. It showed the 5 of us standing around the first tripod, looking at the shoe. We looked small, vulnerable, and completely unaware that someone was directly above us. And then I saw it. On the ground next to the tripod was the digital clock. 000214, 000213. We hadn't run for miles. We had run in a circle that brought us right back to the start in 12 minutes. We were being herded. Look, Dave pointed a shaking finger toward the edge of the clearing. There, nestled in the shadows, were 5 tents. They were set up in a perfect semicircle. They were our tents. The exact same colors, the exact same brands. Even the small tear in Rob's rainfly was there, but we were all carrying our tents on our backs. I could feel the weight of mine pressing into my shoulders. This isn't happening, Rachel said, her voice flat, her mind clearly beginning to reject the reality of the situation. This is some kind of elaborate prank. It has to be. Who would do this? I asked. Who has the money and the time to buy identical gear and set it up just to screw with us? The clock hit 000100. A low humming sound began to vibrate through the ground. It was a mechanical drone, a deep bass frequency that you felt in your teeth. And then the tents began to glow. Not from the outside, but from within. Someone had placed lanterns inside all 5 tents. Shadows began to move against the nylon walls of the tents. In each tent there was the silhouette of a person. They were sitting perfectly still, facing the center of the clearing, facing us. Someone's in there, Dave whispered. Hey. Rob shouted his fear, turning into a desperate, aggressive bravado. Who are you? What do you want? The silhouettes didn't move. The humming grew louder, a thrumming vibration that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. 0000010. 000009. We need to leave, Jenna said, her voice cold and sharp. Not the trail. We go off trail. We head east. The river is that way. If we hit the river, we can follow it down to the bridge. But the brush is too thick, I started. Do you want to see what happens? She screamed. 0000003. 0000002. 000000000. The clock didn't beep. The humming didn't stop. Instead, all the lanterns in the tents went out at once. Total darkness swallowed the clearing, and then we heard it. The sound of 5 zippers opening simultaneously. Zzz. We didn't wait. We bolted into the thickest part of the woods, ignoring the branches that whipped across our faces and the briars that tore at our clothes. We ran like animals, driven by a primal lizard-brain fear. We didn't look back. We didn't talk. We just crashed through the undergrowth, the sound of our own heavy breathing and the snapping of wood filling our ears. We reached the river 3 hours later. We didn't stop there. We waded through the waist-deep freezing water to the other side, thinking it might slow down whoever or whatever was behind us. We hiked until the sun came up, and then we hiked some more until we reached the ranger station near the highway. The rangers were confused. They told us there were no other registered campers in that sector. They sent a team up to the clearing we described. When they came back, they looked unsettled. They found the clearing. They found the tripod and the charred branches, but there were no tents. No digital clock. No child sneaker. Instead, they found 5 small mounds of dirt arranged in a semicircle where the tents had been. Each mound was the size of a human body. And at the head of each mound, a Polaroid was tucked into the dirt. They showed us the photos. They were shots of us sleeping. Not from the trail and not from the clearing. These photos were taken inside our own homes weeks before the trip even started. One of me in my bed. One of Rachel in her kitchen. One of Dave on his couch. To this day, I don't go into the woods. I don't even like going into my backyard after dark. Because sometimes when the house is quiet, I hear a sound coming from the hallway. The distinct metallic sound of a zipper. If you enjoy true horror stories that send chills down your spine, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Every subscription helps keep these stories coming. This happened about 3 years ago when I was doing a solo trek through a lesser-known canyon system in southern Utah. I'm a 8-year-old male, and at the time I considered myself pretty experienced. I had spent months in the backcountry, and I actually preferred the solitude. There's a certain peace you find when you're the only soul for 20 miles in any direction. Or at least, that's what I used to think. I had planned a 5-day loop through a series of slot canyons. My first mistake was not telling anyone my exact coordinates. I'd given my sister a general "I'll be in the Escalante area" text, but nothing specific. I wanted to be off the grid. Truly off the grid. The first day was perfect. The red rock walls towered above me, glowing like embers in the afternoon sun. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the sandy floor and the occasional whistle of wind through the narrows. By nightfall, I'd found a beautiful shelf about 20 feet above the canyon floor to set up my tent standard procedure to avoid flash floods. I cooked a simple meal, watched the stars crawl across the narrow strip of sky visible between the canyon rims, and fell asleep. I woke up at exactly 3:14 a.m. I didn't wake up because of a sound. I woke up because of a feeling. You know that sensation when you're in a crowded room and you realize someone is staring at the back of your head? It was that, but magnified by 1,000. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag listening. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, from the canyon floor below, I heard a sound that made my heart skip a beat. A single footstep in the sand. I held my breath. My hand slowly reached for the bear mace I kept in the pocket of my tent. Then a voice. It was soft, barely a whisper, but it echoed perfectly off the sandstone walls. "Help! Is anyone there? I'm lost." It sounded like a woman. She sounded exhausted, her voice cracking with thirst. My survival instinct screamed at me to zip open the tent and help, but something felt off. The cadence of the voice was rhythmic. Too rhythmic. "Help. Is anyone there? I'm lost. It was the exact same intonation, the exact same pause between the words. It sounded like a recording, but there was no static, no mechanical hiss. I sat up slowly, unzipping the mesh of my tent just an inch so I could peer down at the canyon floor. The moon was high, casting a pale, ghostly light into the canyon. I could see the sandy floor clearly. There was no one there. The space below my ledge was completely empty. No hiker, no woman, no one. Help. Is anyone there? I'm lost. The voice came again, but this time it was closer. It wasn't coming from the floor anymore. It was coming from the rock wall directly across from me, at the same level as my ledge. I swung my headlamp over and clicked it on. The beam hit the opposite wall. It was a sheer face of Navajo sandstone, completely vertical with no handholds or ledges, and yet the voice had come from right there. I scanned the rock with the light. Nothing. Just shadows and stone. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the vastness of the canyon. The voice didn't respond immediately. There was a long silence. Then I heard it again, but it wasn't the woman's voice anymore. "Who's there?" It was my voice. Not just a mimicry, it was a perfect sonic carbon copy of my own voice, including the slight tremor of fear and the specific rasp I get when I'm dehydrated. It sounded like someone had recorded me and played it back through high-end speakers. I felt a wave of cold nausea wash over me. I scrambled back into the center of my tent, clutching my knife. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat there watching the entrance, waiting for a head to pop over the ledge. When the sun finally rose, I didn't wait to make breakfast. I threw everything into my pack, not even folding the tent, just stuffing it in, and started hiking back the way I came. I wanted out. The canyon was narrow, and the walls seemed to be leaning in on me. Every time I rounded a bend, I expected to see someone standing there. But the canyon remained empty. Around noon, I reached a section called the Narrows, where the walls are only about 4 feet apart. To get through, you have to turn sideways and shimmy. As I entered the squeeze, I heard a sound from behind me. It was the sound of a zipper, the distinct metallic zzz of a tent being unzipped. I froze. I was wedged between 2 walls of rock, my backpack, making it hard to move quickly. I looked over my shoulder. At the entrance of the Narrows, about 50 feet back, I saw my own tent, but I had stuffed my tent into my backpack. I could feel the weight of it on my shoulders. I looked down, reaching back to touch my pack. The fabric was there. I could feel the poles. I looked back at the entrance of the Narrows. The tent was set up perfectly on the canyon floor. It was my tent, the same orange North Face model, the same patch on the rainfly where I'd snagged it on a branch a year ago. And then the tent flap began to open from the inside. A hand reached out, a hand wearing a Garmin Fenix watch, the same watch I was wearing on my left wrist. I didn't stay to see who came out. I pushed through the Narrows with a burst of adrenaline that scraped the skin off my shoulders, not caring about the pain. I ran. I didn't stop until I saw the dusty glint of my Jeep at the trailhead 4 hours later. I thought I was safe. I got in, locked the doors, and cranked the engine. I didn't even look back. I drove for 2 hours until I hit a gas station with actual people. I went inside, bought a gallon of water, and sat in the plastic booth shaking. I reached into my pocket to get my phone to call my sister, just to hear a real voice. Instead of my phone, my hand pulled out a small, jagged piece of red sandstone. I frowned, looking at it. I didn't remember picking up any rocks. I reached into my other pocket. Another rock. I opened my backpack to find my phone. I unzipped the main compartment, and my heart stopped. My backpack was full, but not with my gear. It was filled to the brim with heavy Red River stones. My tent, my stove, my sleeping bag, they were all gone. And then my phone, which I'd left in the brain of the pack, started to vibrate. I dug it out from under a heavy rock. I had one new voicemail. It was from myself. The timestamp said it was recorded 2 minutes ago. I played it. The audio was just the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing. Then a whisper. "I'm almost to the car." I sat in that gas station booth for an hour, staring at the stones I'd pulled from my pockets. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't even hold the water bottle. The voicemail, that raspy whispered "I'm almost to the car," played over and over in my head. I was terrified, but a part of me, the logical part that I'd relied on my whole life, was trying to find an explanation. Maybe someone had hiked past me, maybe it was a prank, but the tent, seeing my own tent set up while it was on my back. There was no logical explanation for that. I finally worked up the courage to get back in the Jeep. I had to get home. Home was 6 hours away, mostly through desolate stretches of desert and small dying towns. I kept the interior lights on as I drove, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Every time I passed a rock formation that looked like a person, my heart would jump. Every time a tumbleweed skittered across the road, I slammed on the brakes. About 3 hours into the drive, the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the salt flats. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from the strain of watching the road. That's when I noticed something in the back seat. My backpack. The one I'd filled with rocks. I tossed it onto the floorboards behind the passenger seat. But as I looked in the mirror, I saw that the pack wasn't on the floor anymore. It was sitting upright on the seat, and the zipper, the one I had closed tight, was halfway open. I pulled over to the side of the highway, the tires crunching on the gravel. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I reached back, my hand shaking, and grabbed the handle of the pack. It was light. I pulled it into the front seat and ripped the zipper open. The rocks were gone, but my gear wasn't back. Instead, the bag was filled with sand. Fine red desert sand that spilled out onto my lap and the floor mats. I began to scoop the sand out, desperate to find my phone, my keys, anything. At the very bottom of the bag, my fingers hit something hard and cold. It was my Garmin watch. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but it was still flickering. I looked at the heart rate monitor log. It showed a massive spike at 3:14 a.m. the moment I woke up in the canyon. But then the heart rate dropped. It dropped to 40, then 30, then 0. According to the watch, I had been clinically dead for the last 12 hours. I dropped the watch like it was a hot coal. "No," I whispered. "I'm right here. I'm breathing. I'm moving." I looked at my left wrist. My watch was still there. I compared the two. They were identical. Same scratches, same salt stains on the band. I started the car and pushed it to 90 miles per hour. I didn't care about tickets. I didn't care about anything but getting to a place with people and bright lights. I reached my apartment in the city around midnight. The familiar sight of the brick building and the streetlights usually brought me comfort, but tonight everything felt alien. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, my keys fumbling in my hand. I unlocked the door and stepped inside immediately, flipping every light switch I could find. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. My mail was on the counter. My coffee mug was in the sink. I went straight to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face to try and wake up from this nightmare. I leaned over the sink, eyes closed, letting the water run over my hands. Then I looked up into the mirror. I wasn't there. I could see the shower curtain behind me. I could see the towel rack. I could see the door. But where my reflection should have been, there was only the empty bathroom. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cold. My fingers left prints on the surface. I could feel my face, the stubble on my chin, the bridge of my nose, but the mirror showed nothing. Then a movement caught my eye. The reflection of the bathroom door, the one behind me, began to open. In the mirror, I saw myself walk into the bathroom. The me in the mirror looked exhausted. He was wearing the same clothes, covered in the same red dust. He walked up to the same sink I was standing at, and leaned over to splash water on his face. I stood there, invisible to the mirror, watching my own reflection act independently of me. The mirror me finished washing his face and looked up. Unlike me, he had a reflection. He looked straight at the glass, straight at where I was standing. A slow, terrifyingly wide grin spread across his face. It wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. He raised his hand, the left one wearing the Garmin watch, and tapped the glass. I backed away, stumbling out of the bathroom and into the hallway. I grabbed my jacket and my keys, my mind screaming. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and back to my car. I've been staying in hotels ever since, different ones every night. I pay in cash. I avoid mirrors. I avoid windows. Because 2 days ago, I got another text from my sister. "Hey, glad you're back safe. That dinner tonight was great." You seemed a little quiet, but I figured you were just tired from the trip. Let me know when you want to go hiking again. I haven't seen my sister in weeks. I never went to dinner. I don't know who is living my life right now. I don't know what came out of that canyon in my place. All I know is that when I look at my hands, they're starting to look a little paler, a little more translucent. And every morning when I wake up, my pockets are full of red sand. A few years ago, I made a decision that most people would probably classify as self-inflicted psychological torture. At the time, though, it felt like salvation. I took a seasonal job as a fire lookout in Washington State's Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. I was 29 years old, freshly single, and completely burned out after nearly a decade of high-pressure IT work in Seattle. My life had become a constant stream of notifications, deadlines, and artificial urgency. I didn't just want a break, I wanted silence. The kind of silence that couldn't be interrupted by a phone vibrating in my pocket. The job promised exactly that. There were only 3 lookouts assigned to the entire sector, each stationed miles apart. My post was called Blackwood Ridge Lookout, a small glass-walled cabin perched on top of a 40-foot steel tower. Getting there wasn't simple. You had to drive deep into the mountains for nearly 2 hours, then hike another 4 miles up a steep trail carved into switchbacks. Once you arrived, you were completely alone. 14 days on, 3 days off, no exceptions. The ranger who handed me the keys was named Mike. He looked like the forest had personally shaped him, leathery skin, gray stubble eyes that seemed permanently narrowed against wind and sunlight. He'd worked out there for over 30 years, and nothing about him suggested the kind of man who spooked easily. As he passed me the heavy brass key, he paused, holding onto it for just a second too long. "It gets real quiet up there, Diego," he said evenly. "Some people don't handle that very well. The silence has a way of filling itself." I laughed, assuming he was trying to mess with the new guy. "If you hear things," he continued, "or see things that don't make sense, just remember it's the isolation. Altitude plays tricks on the brain. Don't go looking for problems that aren't there." At the time, I thought the warning was unnecessary. I was a logical person, a systems guy. I trusted patterns, explanations, and causes that could be traced and fixed. I thanked him, packed my gear, and started the hike up to Blackwood Ridge. The first week was everything I'd hoped for. I woke each morning above the clouds, watching sunlight spill across distant peaks like molten gold. From the catwalk, I could see Mount Adams and Mount Rainier rising on the horizon, massive and indifferent. My job was simple. Every hour I stepped outside, scanned the tree line with binoculars for smoke-logged weather conditions, and went back inside. At night, the stars felt close enough to touch. There was no light pollution, no noise, just wind and the faint creaking of the tower settling in the cold. But around day 8, something changed. The silence stopped feeling peaceful. It became attentive. I didn't notice it all at once. It started with small inconsistencies. I'm an organized person, borderline obsessive if I'm being honest. My supplies were arranged carefully. Canned food, alphabetized. Batteries sorted by size and charge. Everything had its place. One morning I woke up and found a can of peaches sitting on the small dining table. I hadn't eaten peaches in days, and I definitely hadn't left the can out. At first I brushed it off. Sleepwalking. Stress. Isolation. Exactly what Mike had warned me about. I put the can back and went about my day. That night, lying on my cot, I heard something. A soft scratching sound. It was rhythmic, faint, and coming from beneath the floorboards. I told myself it was an animal, probably a squirrel or a marmot nesting in the tower's structure. The sound eventually faded, and I drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I found a long, dark strand of hair tangled in the zipper of my sleeping bag. It wasn't mine. My hair is short and light brown. This strand was nearly black and easily a foot long. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through me. I checked the door, still locked from the inside. The windows were latched. The ladder access hatch was bolted shut. There was no realistic way for anyone to climb 40 feet up a steel ladder, enter the cabin, and leave without me hearing it. Still, unease settled into my chest. I radioed Mike later that afternoon, forcing my voice to stay casual. "Hey, Mike. Just checking, do we have any researchers or hikers moving through this area?" There was a long pause. Static hissed before his voice came through. Negative. You're the only one within 10 miles. Why? Probably nothing, I lied. Thought I heard some wildlife messing with the tower. Keep your door locked, he said. Then, after a beat, and stay inside after dark. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair, flashlight in one hand, bear mace in the other, watching the room. Around 2 in the morning, the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from beneath the floor. It was coming from the hatch. The heavy iron ring in the center of the floor began to move, not lifting, just turning, slowly, deliberately. Someone was underneath the cabin. Unscrewing the hatch. Part 2. I jumped to my feet and slammed my boot down on the hatch as hard as I could. I have a gun, I screamed, my voice cracking in the confined space. I've called the police, get out. The turning stopped instantly. No scrambling, no startled breath, just silence. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering so violently I was sure whoever was beneath the floor could hear it. I waited for the sound of someone climbing back down the ladder. I waited for a voice, a curse, anything that would confirm there was a rational explanation for what I just witnessed. Nothing came. I didn't move from that spot for the rest of the night. I stood with my weight planted on the hatch, bear mace clenched in my hand, eyes burning from exhaustion. When the first hint of gray morning light seeped through the windows, I finally allowed myself to breathe. As soon as visibility improved, I stepped out onto the catwalk and aimed my binoculars toward the base of the tower. The ground below was coated in dry dirt and pine needles, undisturbed except for my own footprints from when I'd arrived. At least that's what I expected to see. Instead, the earth around the tower was covered in footprints. Hundreds of them. They weren't boot prints. They were bare feet, small, narrow, almost delicate. But the toes were too long, and the spacing between steps was wrong. The gait was wide and uneven, as if whoever or whatever made them didn't move the way a person should. And etched into the dirt at the base of the tower was a message. The letters were large, jagged, and deep, as if scratched in with fingernails. Let me back in. It's cold out here. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the binoculars. I ran inside and grabbed the radio, desperately calling for Mike. All I got in response was static. Overnight, a thick fog had rolled in, smothering the ridge and cutting off my line of sight to the surrounding peaks. The other towers were gone, swallowed by white. I was 40 feet in the air alone and trapped. Staying wasn't an option. I threw together a small packwater, flashlight, mace, and moved toward the hatch. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the key as I unbolted it. When I pulled the door open, I expected to see someone clinging to the ladder. The ladder was empty, but something caught my eye beneath the floorboards. Pinned to the underside of the cabin, tucked between steel beams, was a collection of objects. My missing socks, a photograph of my ex-girlfriend that I kept in my wallet, and a small handheld mirror. The mirror was angled upward, positioned so whoever hid beneath the floor could see through the gaps between the boards, could watch me while I slept. And pinned at the center of the mirror was a Polaroid-style photograph. It was a picture of me. I was lying on my cot asleep. In the reflection of the window behind me, there was a face pressed against the glass, pale gaunt, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. At 40 feet in the air. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I climbed down the ladder so fast I tore the skin from my palms. When my boots hit the ground, I ran. I sprinted down the trail, lungs burning branches, tearing at my jacket. I was about a mile in when I heard it. A whistle. High. Soft. Melodic. It was the same tune I'd been humming to myself all week. The sound wasn't behind me. It was above me, moving through the treetops. I didn't look up. Something deep in my instincts told me that if I did, I wouldn't keep running. Branches snapped overhead as something leapt effortlessly from tree to tree, pacing me with terrifying ease. Then I heard my name. Diego. The voice came from the brush beside the trail. It sounded exactly like my ex-girlfriend Haley. She was 300 miles away. Why are you running? The voice asked gently. It's beautiful up here. I jammed my fingers into my ears and ran harder. I knew what it was doing. It wasn't just copying voices, it was using my memories, mining my life. I reached the halfway point, an old stone emergency shelter built decades ago. I dove inside and slammed the heavy oak door shut just as something massive hit the exterior wall. The impact rattled the stones. I backed into the corner, eyes fixed on the small square window. Minutes passed. then hours. Finally, a face appeared at the glass. It looked human almost. A woman, or what had once been one. Her skin was ash gray and stretched tight over a dangerously thin frame. Her hair hung in long, matted strands down her back. Her eyes were wide, glowing, faintly yellow, empty of anything familiar. She pressed her face against the window, nose flattening against the glass. "It's so quiet," she whispered, using my voice. "Don't you want someone to talk to?" Her fingers tapped the glass. Tink. 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 The same rhythm as the hatch screws. "I was the lookout before you," she continued. "And the one before me is in the floor. And the one before him is in the trees. We're all still here now." I understood then. The mountain didn't cause hallucinations. It collected people. "If you don't let me in," she growled, "I'll wait at the trailhead. I have your keys." I looked down. My key ring was gone. At dawn, the pressure lifted from the roof. I ran the rest of the way down without stopping. My Jeep was there, but the door was open. Inside, everything was coated in fine gray dust. My keys sat on the driver's seat, melted into a single useless lump. I walked until a logging truck found me. Mike didn't ask questions when I returned. He simply showed me an old photo, another lookout. Long dark hair, eyes just a little too wide. I live in the city now. I need the noise. But sometimes, in the quiet before dawn, I hear scratching inside my walls. And a whistle. The same tune, because once the mountain sees you, it never really lets you go.